Nice.
Okay, so we're recording. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint presentation for everybody as we go through it. Um, what I'm hoping that everybody will do is that they will ask questions that are important to them as we're going through. If it's something that I can answer at the time that we're going through it, I'll do that. If it's something I think that I'm going to be able to answer a little bit later, I may put it off. And then some specific things that are related to actually putting a CMA together, a comparable market analysis, or a broker price opinion or something like that. We're going to be talking about in the next class next month, if that makes sense. So I may push it off for a month. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Somebody has to stay off mute because I'm looking at my PowerPoint and I can't see any of your faces, so I have to know that you guys are
I
participating.
can see it.
Awesome. Okay, so welcome to today's PowerPoint presentation on pricing property accurately and giving you some information to help you present that information, having strategies that will help you to effectively present that information to your clients. So here's why I think this is important. Pricing in Big Bear is more an art than it is a science. I've been using the same phrase for the last 35, 40 years is that, there's big homes next to small homes. There's old houses next to new ones. There are properties that are, two lots away where the land value is double on one lot than it is on the other. So, pricing property is an art. It's not a science. It really makes engineers ticked off to try and price their property in Big Bear. So think there's some questions. I'm going to look and see if there's anything there. Christy's there, Nicole's there. Okay, good. So today, my purpose today is to help you guys understand and to master the nuance in pricing in Big Bear. It's not going to be how to fill out a market evaluation or a CMA. It's going to help you to understand the drivers of value that we have in the Big Bear market. Big Bear is a pretty unique market, and that's the market that you're working in. So that's what we're going to focus on. If you're able to articulate this information well to your clients, it will help you build trust with them. If you can explain to them why you're coming up with your estimate of value, it brings credibility to you. So you have to be able to explain it to them. And if you're effective in doing it, it will shorten the days on market for somebody that puts their property on the market. Over the years, the last 40 years, I've seen a lot of real estate agents that don't have a tremendous amount of um, ability to price properties. So basically what they do is they let the seller choose the price and they put the home on the market and they wait to see if it sells. And with that strategy, properties can stay on the market for an extraordinary amount of time before they sell, which is not helpful for your business because you're spending time and money and effort to market a home for sale that's not selling as quickly as it could. It's also not helping the sellers position either because they're spending some of their equity every month while they continue to maintain a property that they want to sell. Okay. The last thing that being able to master the nuance on pricing will allow you to do is we'll be able to establish value in the eyes of the customer, in their eyes, when they compare you versus some of the other real estate agents that they might be talking to. Any questions so far? Any thoughts? Okay. So here are the 5 things that I want to accomplish today as we go through this is I want to have sort of a discussion where we distinguish the difference between a CMA or a comparable market analysis versus a BPO or a broker's price opinion and adapt the best of each of them for our purpose. The second thing I wanted to do is help you all identify specific value drivers in the Big Bear market pricing. What features are people looking for when they're valuing a home? Third thing that I want to make sure that we come across is that you understand all of the pitfalls in the price per square foot market analysis strategy that people talk about all the time. That's what I hear all the time. You know, there's a report that says the average price in Big Bear is $454 a square foot. In Big Bear City, it's 432. In Sugarloaf, it's 727. Those those numbers are sort of albatross things. They really aren't meaningful when you want to specifically price the value of one specific home in the market. So I want to make sure that you understand that and can explain it. The fourth thing is that I want you to be able to craft what I can call a concise BPO narrative to pinpoint and justify a value for your customer. And we'll talk about that as we go through BPOs. And the last thing is to help you sort of communicate your pricing strategy with confidence to people when you're talking with them. Okay. So I am going to talk about CMAs. I don't think that there's anybody here that doesn't know what a CMA is, but a brief overview of it, just as a reminder, is that you take homes that have recently sold in the market that are comparable to your homeowner's, property that they want to list for sale, or if a buyer is buying a property, if they want a CMA to help you establish value. The typical comparative market analysis takes at least three, or an appraisal will have three, but you have comparable properties that have sold recently that are similar to the subject home, the property that you're talking about. You'll also take three or more active properties that are on the market currently that are in competition. And some people will even go to the thing about putting three or more homes on the CMA that have expired unsold or were withdrawn and unsold. So I'm going to ask everybody, those of you that are seasoned, that have been in the Big Bear market for a while, what is the number one reason why CMAs are so difficult to help you price a property for a seller?
Well, I think our neighborhoods are eclectic. That going out a mile or a half a mile, sometimes you can't. Well, first of all, you've got different homes in the same neighborhood, but right now, what I'm finding is there's not enough sold comps. I'm having to reach outside the 1 mile area, and another thing that I find that is a challenge is sometimes a very comparable property might be in a different neighborhood. Say, like you've got your Forest Springs and then your Whispering Forest, or I'm just throwing those out there, but they may be more than a mile away.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and the short way that I would explain that is that there's not enough specific data that you can do a comparable market analysis and have it say the property's worth $450,000 and be that clear and be that accurate that you don't have to think about some of the other things that we're going to talk about. Okay. So there's not enough similar data that makes it clear. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what banks started using. And I first started seeing broker price opinions. I want to say it was probably 1993, 94, when we started having a lot of REOs, the first time that I was in the market that we started seeing a lot of those. And the broker price opinion did a lot of what the CMA did, is it asked for three comparable sales, it asked for three competing listings. But what it did do that was different is that they asked for the broker's opinion of value. That was what was different about BPOs versus comparable market analysis. Most sellers, when they get a comparable market analysis, think that they're going to get this set of data and that it is going to clearly display to them what the value is. And because we don't have enough data to make that clear, the CMAs, they're all over the place. I mean, they're not accurate. They're all over the place. And so when the broker price opinion started coming into place, the most important part of the broker price opinion was the narrative paragraph where the asset manager, the person at the bank said in the broker's price opinion, justify the value that you are saying. And so what would happen so often when you were doing a broker price opinion is you might have closed sales that were 680, 720, 705, and your opinion of value would be 600. And in the broker price opinion justification narrative, you were supposed to explain to them why. You were supposed to explain that there was so much deferred maintenance and there was foundation issues that were going to cost $40,000 or $50,000 in repairs. They were looking for things that the data from a normal CMA wouldn't tell you what the value was. They were looking for you to answer that in your narrative. Does that make any sense? Okay. So banks, when they were going through all of their REO properties and foreclosures, they were looking for brokers to give you insight on what the value was because they recognized that the numbers didn't tell the whole story. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the differences in market variability in Big Bear. And I know this, and I think most of you know this, is that if you're looking at a lakefront lot, something that's down on Round Drive or something that is, got a slight downslope lot, with a lot of trees on it. Lakeview Drive has some of those. The lot value on a lakefront lot might be $1 million, it might be $1.2 million, it might be $1.5 million. If you go across the street to where there is a lake view, the lot value might be $350,000 and you're 100 feet away from it. A lakefront lot over in Fawnskin, if you get back in Grout Bay, where 15 out of 20 years there's no water in it, the lot value over there might be $200,000 for a lakefront lot versus $1.2 million that is on Round Drive. So the land value, just like everything else in Big Bear, varies very much by the features that are there. So you might have $1 million lakefront lot on Round Drive, and you might have a $500,000 lakefront lot that is in a cove that is only 500 or 600 feet away, if that makes sense. Same thing that happens in Moonridge when you have a view. People advertise, you have a ski slope view, and in some houses, when you go to the house, you have to stand on a ladder on the deck, looking around the side of the house to see a peekaboo view of the lake. And they're advertising it as a ski slope view, or a peekaboo lake view versus other houses that have a 200-degree view that looks through power lines. Some of them have panoramic views where all you see are treetops in the lake and the ski area. And so the quality of those views are going to really make the difference in value very wide. I've seen view lots in Moonridge that are 350 and 400,000, and some ski slope and Lakeview lots there are only worth 180,000. So I want you guys or somebody to pipe in and say, what is another feature of a lot in Moonridge that has a view that would affect how the value is? What is there other than the quality of the view?
How steep the hill is, or if it's flat or sloped.
Absolutely. Perfect answer. So if you are in Moonridge and you have an upslope lot, you might have to dig into the side of that hill to try and get any kind of access to the front of the house. And then you might have 75 stairs to get up to the house. Now, it's got a really great panoramic view, but you've got $150,000 worth of dirt work that needs to be done in order to get a foundation in and make some access to the house. And the access isn't convenient unless you're a triathlete or something. Compare that to a view lot in Moonridge that is on a downslope where you can backfill the parking pad and the garage to where it has level access off of the street. So you drive straight in off of the street and you're able garage and have level access to the main living area of the house. All of those kinds of features are going to be critical to trying to establish value for a home. Okay. The last thing that I'll talk a little bit about is, whether something is newly built, versus something that was in the 1970s. The comps can mislead a lot in those areas. It's hard for me to imagine, and I'll share this with some of you, is that when I first started selling, and I think I was talking with Dan about this a couple of weeks ago, when I first started selling, 1980 was the big criteria. 1980 was the most important thing because in 1980, they mandated dual pane windows and upgraded insulation in cabins. So a house that was built prior to 1980, had an automatic discount to the value because it didn't have those features versus something that was built after 1980. And a lot of times, I'm looking back, that was 40 years ago. And right now we're looking at 1992. They started upgrading the features for earthquake safety and structural stability of the houses. Later, they started doing things that were more for fire, for fire safety and that kind of thing. So anything that was built after 2010 now, in my opinion, is pretty dated, compared to the market now. But back then, it was 1980 was the cutoff period. So each decade has styles of construction that are very different. And what you notice as time goes by with the styles of construction is that the staircases tend to get wider, the windows tend to get larger, the floor plans tend to be more open. Okay. The houses tend to be lighter the newer that they get. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience, but if you look at the decades of homes that are out there in construction, even a home that was built in 1970 that's been remodeled and is effectively a new house, if you look at the floor plan, it's dated. There's more rooms to it. The rooms are smaller. The rooms are cut up. The hallways are tighter. The windows are smaller. Okay. They're not quite as light. So those are things that you need to look at that change the value of the home. Okay. So I'm going to remind anybody, if you have any questions, yell them out so I can talk to you about things that are of interest to you. Nothing so far. Okay. So here's one of the things that I like to do when I'm out previewing property, and you guys are doing this on Thursday, is there are several things that when I walk through a home, I'm taking a look at as I preview the home to get a feel for it. Now, I've got 40 years of experience, so it's pretty quick. In my mind, I sort of get a quick feel for them. But here are the things that I believe that buyers are looking for that affect them, whether they actually say it or not. It's in the back of their mind. As they're looking through a house, there's things that they're looking at. Number one, they're looking for the material quality. Homes that were built in the 70s had Formica. Formica countertops is not super high quality. In the 1980s, it was ceramic tile. Now we have granite and quartz and quartzite and all kinds of things. So the materials on countertops change. The wall materials, is it drywall or is it wood? Wainscoting was real popular in the 80s. There are a lot of things that are different about material quality that a buyer is going to be looking at to determine value. Another thing that they look at sort of unconsciously as they're walking through the home is the fit and finish. What's the quality of the actual construction? I'm not going to use any names for builders, but I know that there's a lot of people that have used pretty flashy materials to build a house, and when it's brand new, the house looks great, and 3 years later, after all of the wood has shrunk, you have cracks in the drywall and cracks in the wood that's, in the stuff, and the windows are starting to leak because the quality of the fit and finish, the quality of the workmanship isn't very high quality. So that's one of the things that you want to be paying attention to when you're previewing property or trying to determine value. Another one would be the maintenance condition of the house. When you walk through it, is it clean? Are the walls all beat up and marked up, and do they need to be painted? Are there gouges in the walls? Are there gouges in the floor? Is there mold in the cracks in the bathrooms? Okay. Another thing would be the location and the desirability of that location. Now, some of this obviously is going to be based on the interest of the buyer, but if you are close to the national forest, that tends to be something that is going to create value in the eyes of a buyer and a seller, when they're selling. Being close to the village for some people, one of the best neighborhoods in the world for people that like to drink and entertain is Ironwood Estates. They're above the village, so they can walk up to their house after they've had a night of hard drinking, and they don't have to get worried about getting pulled over and stopped by the police driving home after a night. They can walk down there and party and do different things. So there's locations that create desirability. Obviously, the lake is a location that people are going to be putting value on as well. One of the things that I think is very important that a lot of people don't think about is access. And access are things that are more than just how steep the driveway is. The access could be how far is it from the main boulevard? How hard is it to get to in the wintertime? Some people drive up to Big Bear and the highway, the boulevard is plowed and they can come up Fox Farm Road into Fox Farm, in 3 to 5 minutes. It's fairly level, easy access, and they drive to their place. And I would say that access for most people coming into Fox Farm is probably an 8 or 9. And if they have a level driveway and it's, level off the street, that's probably a 10 for access because it's easy to get to. If they have 2 or 3 steps to get into their house, it makes the way to get into the house very, very easy. But the access may not be easy if there's 75 stairs to get to the front door. The access goes down if the driveway is very, very steep, right? Another factor would be is if it's up in the very, very, very top of Moon Ridge, maybe up on Cascade, way up in the back there to where they have to drive for 15 minutes off of Big Bear Boulevard to get to their house in the winter. And it's not just the time, but they've also got to go up steep slopes and they might even have to put chains on their cars to get up there. So what is the access, right? These are all things that are going to be affecting value. We talked about the age of construction, whether they had thin or wide hallways or thin or wide stairways. A lot of that is going to have to do with how modern the construction is and how functional the layout. When I was back with all of you previewing property last month, I think we were there and we went out, and there were some houses that we went into that were basically the same floor plan that they had originally constructed. They had an open living room, open kitchen, dining room, and they had a wide hallway that went to 3 different bedrooms, and there were a couple or 2 or 3 different baths. And what I consider those to be is, pretty standard, desirable homes for the majority of the public. Most of the people that buy property in Big Bear aren't looking for some addition that has, 800 square foot in this big room that has a bunch of closets in it. I mean, unless they're looking for a sewing room, or unless they're looking for a model making room, or unless they're looking for a band rehearsal room, having some albatross kind of room added on to a home doesn't really fit the majority of the buyers. I hope that makes sense to everybody. So the thought that went through my mind is some homes have functional layouts and some of them have very, very specific ones. And if you have a very, very specific feature to your house that most people don't want, your buyer pool goes down pretty drastically. Okay. The next one that I'm going to talk about is curb appeal and neighborhood harmony. Personal story on this is when I first moved to Big Bear back in 1985, I moved out into Shea Meadow, and I had come from Downey. And Downey was a residential area that had a lot of traffic in it. Homes were pretty close together. And when I moved, onto Big Bear Boulevard out in Shea Meadow, I was looking across the street at meadows and trees and horses and a couple of ranches, and I thought like I was in a Bonanza episode, and I mean, I loved it, and that's the area that I bought in. And I remember within the first several months of starting to sell real estate, I took somebody out into that neighborhood, and I was driving around, and they said, "We don't like this area," which sort of irritated me because I lived in that area. And rather than argue with them, I asked them the question. I said, why do you say it doesn't look like, why does not it not feel like the mountains? Or they said, it doesn't feel like the mountains. I said, well, can you tell me why? Well, there's not enough trees. That was what they said. There's not enough trees. And so as we went through other neighborhoods, we got into that area of Big Bear City, I think Sugarloaf Boulevard, Mountain Lane, Rainbow, in that area where the houses were a lot closer together, but there were a lot of pine trees. And as they pulled up to a house, they said, yeah, we like this. And what I recognized is a lot of people don't think they're in the mountains unless they have a lot of the trees in the front yard. Okay. So it's important to recognize what your buyer or what the average or the typical buyer is looking for as far as curb appeal. Okay, and to make judgments on that. The other one is neighborhood harmony. Sometimes we drive around in the neighborhoods down by the airport, on Airplane down there. And if it's wintertime and there's 2 feet of snow, the prices tend to be, 15 or 20% less over there by the airport. But if there's 2 feet of snow, somebody might buy a house thinking I got a great deal. It was 20% lower than the one I looked at on Rainbow on the other side of the boulevard. And then in the springtime, when all the snow melts, they say, hey, where did that junk car come from next door? And where did that washer and dryer come from next door? Okay, so neighborhood harmony is something that people are going to be looking at also when they are trying to determine value. So you're going to get people that want to be in a neighborhood that has underground utilities. A lot of Fox Farm is that way. Almost all of the new subdivisions are that way. So those are things that are going to affect value for buyers as well as on your CMA. The last one that I'll talk about is the bonus of the vacation rental income potential. It doesn't necessarily create a tremendous amount of value for a home. I mean, if you have a home that's worth 400,000, it's probably worth 400,000, but it might be worth more to a buyer that is looking at it as an income potential source. Okay, so it's important to know which homes will fit a productive pool for vacation rentals when you're talking about value for people, because it will give more buyers the ability to buy it if they can use some of that income to make the payments. Does that make sense? So any questions? I feel like I'm talking into a black box, so it would be great if there were some questions or some feedback from you guys before I go on.
I would have to agree, Mark. I've been working with some clients for a few months now, and the vacation rental income property or potential is really one of their top things, and I think the best way that I've been able to just kind of let them know is that it's not a guarantee, but definitely there's a potential of supplemental income. So one of the selling points I think in the past have always been kind of, oh, well, you can, make money on it, if you put it as a STR. But now, because of the oversaturation in the market of all the vacation rentals, one of the things that I've been super transparent about, and it's definitely helped, is letting them know that supplemental income is definitely something that they can get, but it's not going to always pay the bills. So I mean, unless they're marketed right and very competitive. So anyway, just giving you feedback because you asked.
Good. I appreciate that. And so when I'm out previewing property and I'm looking at a house, I use in my mind a scale of 1 to 10 to rate the homes that I'm going into. So as I pull up to a house when I'm on tour, I will look at it, and from 40 years of experience of driving up to homes and hearing what buyers say about the house when they pull up to it. And that's what is really important for you guys to get, is that your market knowledge as a real estate agent, a professional real estate agent in Big Bear, isn't always to agree with the seller.
Mhm.
It's not for you to, it's not for you to dictate to people what you think is important. It's what does the market, it is what does the market dictate is important. And so, after 40 years of pulling up to houses and listening to what people say and walking through houses and listening to what buyers say, going on tour and listening to what the other brokers are saying as they go through the house, you get a good feel, and it's not something that you can see on a CMA or a comparable market analysis of what the market is going to say about a house. So if I pull up to a house and there's a steep driveway with a big hump in the middle of it, and at the top of it, there's a single car garage that you've got to drive into, and it looks like you're going to fall off the side of the hill while you're doing it, I know not only from my own feelings, but I also know from people pulling up to those houses over the years that the access to that is going to probably be a 0 or a 1. And so what I start doing is I look at a house, as I will say, that's, for an access that's got 5, it's an average access. There's a little bit of a slope to it, but it's not bad. And we're halfway into Moon Ridge. We're not at the bottom. We're not at the top. So that's got a 5 for access. Oh, there's 35 steps. Oh, that's going to drop some. It's going to be a 3 for access. Okay. So I start putting these numbers, 1 through 10 or 0 through 10, for access, for the material quality. If I walk into a brand new house and I see quartzite and the craftsmanship is great and all the materials are great, I'll say, the materials in this house are a 10. The fit and finish in this house is as good as it gets here in Big Bear. That's a 10. It's a brand new house. The maintenance condition is a 10. The location and desirability might be a 6. It might be, a funky size lot that is in the back of a cul-de-sac that has no view. And it's not in Castle Glen or it's not in Eagle Point Estates. Let's say it's, in the back half of, Big Bear City. Okay, so it's got a good location, but it's not the best location. It's not a 10 location, it's a 7. Okay, so the access off the boulevard, we talked about that. The functional layout, because it's a new home and being modern is a 10. The curb appeal might be a 7. Okay, and so what I'm doing is I go through houses, I'm evaluating these homes as I go through them for how the market in general is going to perceive it. Okay. If I walk into a house that was built in 1970 and they put on one of those 10 by 30 bonus rooms that has no purpose for most people, and then there's a separate garage with a guest thing that has poor access to it, I mean, I'm going to give the functional layout probably a 2, because very few people in the market are going to be after that. Most people are going to say that's not for me. That makes sense. So as I'm going through houses, trying to evaluate them from price, I'm scaling all of these things on a scale of 1 to 10. When I'm showing property to the buyer, now they're the buyer, they're the ones that are making the decisions. I will go through the homes with them and ask them to rate those things on a scale of 1 to 10, how they feel about it. So let's say, for example, I walk into a house that has separate guest quarters that's not really functionally all that accurate for the majority of buyers. And it has this addition room on it that I think is useless for most buyers. And I ask the buyer, how do you feel about this floor plan? Does this work for you? And they say, oh, yeah, this is absolutely great. It's a 10 for us because I can make this my sewing room, or this can be our band practice room. Okay, so buyers are going to be determining value from the features that are most important to them. That makes sense? So do I have any questions on that?
I had
Okay,
a question. Do you have a checklist? Like, or are you just doing that all in your head?
I'm doing it in my head. Could I put it into a checklist for agents if they're not using that? I mean, I could come up with with something that I could give you guys to use on it. I know when we used to tour, 7, 8 years ago, with new agents that had joined the company, I mean, I would basically ask them to rate the houses while we were there in front of the house. You just walk through this house. What is the materials? How would you rate the materials? How would you rate the floor plan? How would you rate the curb appeal? How would you rate the access? Okay. When we're out previewing property, we're not out there just to socialize. I guarantee you, we're out there to work. And what we're doing out there is we're trying to evaluate our inventory and determine the value for it. Okay. So I'll make a note of that to come up with a checklist that I can send everybody if there's people that are interested in that. Okay.
I just think that would be helpful for new agents.
Okay. Yeah. So I will come up with that. So the next thing I want to talk about is the price per square foot trap. And I don't know if the handout that I sent you to read, and I hope all of you read it before, because if you did, then it would probably prompt you to give me some questions or make you question some things. But one of the challenges with the price per square foot, and you see this in the newspaper all the time, is they'll say, the market has gone up 2% in the last year. The average sales price last year was $435, and this year it's $462. And that means absolutely nothing. Okay. Mixing apples and oranges skews the averages. Okay. So, one of the examples, and I wrote this down, so I'm going to read it to you because I think it's really helpful, these numbers when you're looking at price per square foot. So let's talk about a particular market. Let's say in a particular marketplace, all the homes are 2,000 square feet, which they're not. But the lot sizes, views, and quality happen to be different, which is true for our market. So 2,000 square foot houses, there's plenty of them, but the lot sizes, the views, and the quality are very different. Some are valued at 200,000 and others are at 400,000. If there are 10 sales in a month, 5 at 200 and 5 at 400,000, it means the average sales price is 300,000 and the average price per square foot is 150,000. That's just doing the math. That's what the statistics say. That's what the comps say, right? Or that's what the price per square foot says. So let's say in the next month, 10 more homes sell. So there's no change in the market. 8 sell for 400,000 and 2 sell for 200,000. Now the average sales price is 360,000 and the average price per square foot goes up to 180 square feet. Absolutely nothing has changed in the market regarding pricing for the individual homes. They're not going up, but that's not what people think because they just looked at price per square foot changes that were advertised in the newspaper. They base their assumptions on the market without thinking. So the last examples I'll say, in month number 3, there's 10 more sales again, 8 at 200 this time and 2 at 400,000. Now the average sales price has dropped to 240,000 and the average price per square foot is 120. In these 3 months, the value of each of the homes in that market did not change whatsoever, but which homes actually did sell changed, and that messes people up. It screws up the averages badly. Does that make sense to everybody completely? Is there any doubt in what I just shared there?
That makes sense.
Okay. So do you ever have sellers that tell you, well, you're telling me my house is worth 400 a square foot, but I see the average price in Big Bear City is 435, so you're shortchanging me. I'm going to use somebody else. Anybody have that experience?
I've heard people ask about that, bring that up, but not anyone saying that they're going to use someone else because the price per square foot.
Okay. Have you ever had, well, so somebody besides Mickey this time, has anybody else ever had that objection where you would recommend a price and the seller comes back and says, but the average sales price is this?
Yes, I have.
Okay, Yasmin, very good. I mean, I think it's universal. I think it's universal. I think everybody has that issue. So the question then becomes, well, how do you answer that objection? Because the truth is, they saw in the newspapers that the average sales price was $435 a square foot, and your CMA, you're telling them, that it's worth 400. Okay, and so they're not trusting you. Okay, so one of the stories that I like to talk about when it's price per square footage is I say, the numbers don't tell the whole story. It's what the numbers represent that make a difference. Can I share an example with you? And if they say, yeah, let me go ahead and share the story, I'll say, well, consider, a four-door sedan, a car, a brand new car, and the brand new cars have four doors, and the brand new cars have an engine, and all of the cars have, tires and brakes and seats in them, and they'll get you from point A to point B. Okay. You got two different cars, and they'll both get you in the same place, and they've got the same features. That's what price per square foot is like. Okay. So now I want you to think about one of the cars is a Toyota Corolla that sells for $35,000 a year, and the other one is a Mercedes 450 SL that sells for $120,000. Okay. They both have the same features. So my question to you, would you be willing to pay $135,000 for the Toyota? And they say, absolutely not. And I say, well, why not? And they go, because the Mercedes is worth more than the Toyota. And I said, you're right. But why is that? Well, it's nicer. It's got leather seats, and it's got upgraded tires and a better braking system, and the engine's better, and the fit and finish of the car is better. Some of the same features that we're talking about the house, it's just better. And there's a reason. So we have to be able to explain those differences to our sellers when we're trying to determine value. So the bottom line is that in order to help accurately price property, you need to dig deeper than the raw numbers. You need to understand what creates value, and your ability to understand it and to articulate it to your customer is what creates your value as a real estate professional. That's probably the main point that I want to get across to all of you today, is to understand what the differences are with homes, to help you to understand why one home is worth more than the other, and to be able to explain that to your buyers and sellers is what makes you valuable as a real estate agent. Okay, so that's the key takeaways. Okay, the key takeaways is that pricing success is the result of your market insight, knowing your inventory, knowing all of these features and benefits of the houses, and being able to categorize them, and your ability to communicate it to your sellers and your buyers. The data informs you of pricing and things, but your narrative is going to be what convinces people. So for example, if you're talking with somebody and they say, well, there's two 2,000 square foot houses next to each other, and one is 420,000 and the other one is 520. And if somebody says to you, well, why is that $100,000 different in value? Your question would be this. If you had your choice between Formica countertops, ceramic tile countertops, or brand new quartz, what kind of countertops would you want? And anybody can answer. Somebody's got to answer.
I want granite.
You want granite, and I agree with you. Why?
Because it's nicer.
It's nicer. Okay. So if you had your choice of having a panoramic view of the lake and the ski slope, or having a peekaboo view, which would you prefer?
View of the slopes.
The panoramic one, wouldn't you? Okay.
Panoramic.
And I agree with you, and most people would feel the same way. So as we look at these homes that are 2,000 square feet, here are the features, here are the benefits that make one 2,000 square foot home better than the other. To be able to articulate it, it's the ease of access, it's the quality of the view, it's the quality of the materials, it's the quality and functionality of the floor plan. Those are the things that make it worth more than the other 2,000 square foot house. To be able to give them a narrative that is convincing to them is very helpful. And when you do that, you educate your customer. And when you educate them, that's the best way for you to win the listing. Or to get a buyer to move forward at a price that will actually buy the house. For all of you, before I open it up for Q&A, if you guys have any questions, is when you're previewing property or when you're doing market analysis for any properties that you're working on, whether it's to get a listing or whether it's with a buyer that you're trying to help buy a home and they're asking what's the value, is apply the 0 to 10 rating system to your next CMA or your buyer showing dialogue to help you express the differences in the homes and the value to your customer. Start applying that 0 to 10 rating. The next thing I would like for you to do is to draft what I call a broker price opinion narrative and email it to me for feedback. And so what I would ask you to do is to take a home, do your comparables, pull up, 3 or 4 comparables and include them with your narrative, and then write a paragraph and explain to me what you think the subject house is worth and why, and compare it using those rating systems to the comparables that you have. So you might say, I'm doing this house up in Castle Glen, and I'm doing this one over here, and I'm using this comp over here. The subject house is better because the view is a 10 versus a 3, and here's why. Here's what you can see with it. Does that make sense? So if you want to do the homework assignment, do a CMA or do a broker price opinion where you take 3 comps and you compare that house to the comps and send me the narrative and explain to me what you think the value is and why. The last thing that will be the next steps is to attend next month's training, where I will provide to you 2 or 3 different comparable market analysis formats. A very simple one that I've used over the years that's probably too basic. You probably don't want to use it today. There's also one that can be done right out of our MLS system that will work. There's one that can be done out of KV Core or the new Bold Trail program that you can use, as well as a broker price opinion. I'll have that format for you as well so that you can see them. Now, I will caution you that the training that we do next month for these different ways that you can format the CMA, you can master any different way to prepare the CMA and provide it to your client. But unless you have the ability to explain to them the differences in the comparables and make adjustments for value, you're never going to be able to accurately convince them to price the property at the right price. If they look at the CMA, if they look at any different CMA format or any broker price format, and you don't give them a good narrative, they're going to look at the CMA and they're going to say, I'm going to pick the highest price. I'm going to pick my price because this CMA doesn't clarify it. Your ability as a salesperson to explain the CMA to them is what's going to make the difference. So I'm going to unshare my screen. I'm going to come back to reality because I've been looking at a black box now for the last 45 minutes, which is really boring. I hate doing that. Now I get to see all of your smiling faces. So give me some questions or give me some real life scenarios that you've come up with, and maybe we can brainstorm some ideas that will help you with it.
Yeah, I've got one for you. There's been a couple houses on tour lately where you have to walk through a bedroom to get to another bedroom. So I'd like your opinion on that. Would you consider that a true, obviously it's not a true 2-bedroom, but just curious your thoughts on that.
There is a phrase, and I think Eric will recognize this, functional obsolescence. Do you remember that from your, yeah, functional obsolescence?
Yeah,
is what
my house is functional obsolescence, but yes.
Okay, so, and what's interesting about that phrase, functional obsolescence, and it sort of goes into that, the desirability of a floor plan, okay? is that the person that did that addition, that added the bedroom onto the other bedroom, they did it because they had a problem that they wanted to solve. They solved their problem, but they didn't solve the market's problem, right? And that's what functional obsolescence is. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a, a problem when, they didn't solve the problem with it. That is definitely a problem for creating, top dollar value. I mean, you're not going to get top dollar for something where you do that kind of thing. It's going to be an adjustment downward in price. And some people won't even buy it unless they're constrained by price. So a real life example of that is if you have a first-time home buyer, and maybe Virginia's had this experience down in the desert because you were working primarily with first-time home buyers, I would imagine, or you were with full-time occupants. And so if a buyer has a budget limit of $400,000 and the only $400,000 house that meets their needs, let's say that they need 4 bedrooms and 3 baths, if the only 4-bedroom house that they can get has a bedroom addition that walks through another bedroom, they might consider it because it's their only option to buy a 4-bedroom. And they justify it by saying, our baby's an infant, and so we can have the baby's, bedroom off of our master bedroom, and our other 2 kids can be in the other bedrooms. And so they're willing to accept that limitation in the obsolete floor plan in order to buy it. Make sense? Okay. 90% of the buyers probably would look and say, I don't want that. Okay. Good question. That happens a lot in Big Bear, especially houses built in the 70s.
Hey, Mark,
Yes, Bill.
when we talk about not enough comps, one of the ways we can do that is extend the circle that we're looking at. The appraisers seem to say don't do that, but extend the year. Instead of 6 months, look at 9 months or 12. What's your comments on that?
Well, I don't know that this is a great answer. I mean, this is my answer, so I think it's the best answer, but I think it's hard to duplicate. I usually know what the value of a house is when I walk through it. I usually know what the value of, I mean, I have a pretty good idea what somebody is willing to spend for a house when I walk through it because I walk through so many. So when I am pulling comparables, I look for homes that give me a logical way to make adjustments that will back up the price that I'm trying to share with my client. So if I know a home is worth 400,000, I'm going to widen, the area, see if I can find homes that I can make adjustments for. So let's say that we're in, Pinewood Estates. Pinewood Estates was done, a lot of the homes were done in the late 70s, early 80s, but it's got comparables in there that were built in the last 10, 15 years, which is very similar to things that are up in Lofty View in that neighborhood, or not the newer part, but in the older part of Lofty View and Panorama. It's also the same thing as Forest Springs. So the age of the homes in Pinewood Estates versus Lofty View area and 80 acres, they're the same. Those homes were built about the same time. And so I will use those comparables because they're very similar in buyer appeal, even though they're not technically within a mile. I think if you go from Pinewood Estates to Lofty View, I think that's probably 3 miles. So if appraisers say don't go 3 miles, well, I'd rather go to Lofty View for my comparable than to go back 3 years to find 3 houses that are exactly the same in Pinewood Estates. Does that make sense? So I'm not giving you a straight answer. I'm not saying go back in time, and I'm not saying go back or going outside the circle. What I'm saying is go find the comps that justify the message that you're trying to share with your seller.
I don't think you're that we should find comps that support our initial estimation. That kind of is tweaking the books here.
Well, I mean, that's what's worked for me, Bill. I mean, that's why I made the comment is that, a lot of people might not agree with that, and it sounds like you're one of those. But if I pull data that is apples to oranges, and I use the less than 1 mile, I'm going to have a huge argument from the seller. I'm going to have a huge argument from the seller. If I pull comps going back 2 or 3 years, I'm going to get a huge argument from the seller that says that house was 3 years ago. Well, but I adjusted it up 60,000. Well, I don't care. I want 150,000 more for my house. So when I'm preparing a CMA and putting it in front of the seller, if the houses look the same, if they're the single-story ranch style with a 2-car garage, and one's in Pinewood Estates and one's on Lofty View and one's, in 80 acres or Forest Springs, and one might even be over in Fox Farms somewhere. The houses look the same. So in their mind, they say, that looks like my house. And I can say, well, that one at 500 comes down to 450 for yours. And this one over here at 375 comes up because it's not as good as yours, if that makes sense. But if I'm trying to compare apples to oranges, it's been harder for me. So we may disagree in what comps to pull, but that's how I explain it.
Yeah,
Okay,
see,
thank you. That makes sense.
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. See, that's the problem I've been having right now, where the sellers that I've been getting like a CMA and getting it on the market, the houses are like super big houses, and the square footage are over 2,100 square feet, and it's in a really bad area. And they're not looking at that. They're like, but you're showing me comps that are smaller than mine. I'm like, yeah, but this is the area where we're selling yours. That's the problem I've been having, because I've been going to seller appointments recently, and they're newer constructions. So that's why I'm like, what do I do in that situation?
Yeah. I mean, it really does come down exactly to what I was sharing with you about the factors that affect value. And what I say is the typical buyer, and so I'm going to go back to Evan's example. I mean, Evan's example is somebody needed an extra bedroom, so they added it on another bedroom so it fit their need. And so they don't see any problem with that because it fit their need. Well, if it doesn't fit the need of the market, there's no value in that extra bedroom. To the market, there's no value, if that makes sense. In the example that I gave you about me living out on East Big Bear Boulevard out in Shea Meadow, and how, to me that was beautiful. And when the buyer came in and said, I want to be in the mountains, I live in Orange County, I want to have a lot of pine trees, I don't want to be out in Shea Meadow, there's no value to Shea Meadow in that view to them. So as real estate professionals, understanding what the market is looking for and what the market values is how we price property. And Bill, you know that better than your customers, right? You know that better than your customers. And so if you have limited data, or if you have apples and oranges data that totally confuses your customer because it doesn't tell them what they need to know, they need you to tell them what they need to know. As most buyers want granite countertops today, they don't want Formica. And
do they still make Formica?
I bet you they do. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's houses that have it. There's still houses that have it, and I think there's some rentals. There's rental houses in some areas where I think when people remodel, they put it back in there. So
Mark, I have a thought. We kind of touched on it when we talked about some things last week, and just maybe to kind of get people thinking about what value. I know we have the rating system 0 to 10. I don't know if there's a 0, which means it would have no value. I mean, it's some if it's there, it's something. It has some value. It might be a 1 or 0.5% or something. But anyway, what value do you place on the 0 or the 1 to 10 items? Like, you start with an average per square foot, and what would that be? Okay, well, we know that doesn't quite work. So this one has a garage, so we're going to add 50,000. This one doesn't have a garage, so we're going to take away 50,000. A bathroom, a half bath, all the different things, the functional obsolescence, the location obsolescence, where Yasmin, and it's not called location. What is it called? It's you're dealing with the location and the condition of the home that you're trying to sell or trying to price. So you have a big, beautiful new home in a junky neighborhood, or I don't want to say junky, but older, not well-maintained homes, smaller. That's why in Big Bear, we have a saying, cabins to castles, right? So if you're going to build a big, beautiful new home, don't build it next to, some little junky house, if you want to have the most value.
Yeah.
When you want to go
Yeah,
to
see,
that
and
house.
that's my problem right now. The house is a 10, but the neighborhood is like a 3.
Okay, so then how much do we take off the value because of the location? And that's something that we have to learn what those values are. And look at that and either add it or take it away based on the average. And you can do that in your comps in the MLS. Because we are not Irvine, or we're not, a planned community where every house was built in, the same year, built, you have 5 floor plans. They're all alike. Those are easy. It's either what condition is it in? I mean, that's probably the biggest question is, what condition is it in? What location is it in the community? Is it in a cul-de-sac? Obviously, that's going to be better, or the views. But with us, like, how much more is a lake view or a lakefront lot than a lot across the street? What's the value of a lake view?
Well, okay, so I'll give you some answers on that. Is that you can go back over the last, probably 3, 4, 5 years, because there's very few comps out there. If you go back and you look for lakefront lots that have sold, if you go back 4 or 5 years, you'll be able to see which lots have sold that are on the lake, and there's not a lot of them, but you can get a feel for them. Okay, you can go over into Grout Bay and say, it's 150,000 was the last, lot that sold there, and there's a $500,000 lot over on Lakeview that sold in shallow water, and there's $1.3 million lot on Lakeview in the deeper water that sold. I think Becky just had one that sold, in the last year or so in that price point. And so you can go and you can get a feel for it. You can get a feel for it. You can look at lots in Moonridge and look at what has sold for 80,000, what sold for 120, and you can get the characteristics of what has sold, at 80,000, what sold at 120,000, what sold at 250,000 in Moonridge. Pricing property is not easy. Obviously you can tell as we're going through, it is not easy to do that. It takes a lot of thought. So I'll give you a couple more examples, and we will work on one of them when we're doing the CMA presentation next week, because the easiest thing to do with the CMA when you're going through it with the seller, if you're actually sitting with them and going through it, is you can say, this house right here has granite countertops, and it has hardwood floors, and it has this and that and the other, and you have 1980s ceramic tile. That house is better than yours. And they sold at $460 a square foot. So we know that we're not $460 a square foot. So you put an arrow that says down, it's going to be lower than that. And then you show them another home that was built in 1980 that has ceramic tile, that doesn't have a garage, that's sold for, $405 a square foot. And you say your house is better than this one because you had a garage. So you put an up arrow. And so you start taking the comparables and you start putting arrows, and that will start opening up a price point that works for your seller and say, well, we know you're not this high and we know you're not this low, so you're going to be here in the middle. That makes sense. So that's one of the strategies of presenting, but you still have to be able to explain why one's better than the other. And that's what today is about. Why is one better than the other? And I think I'm going to address this one to Bill and all of you, is that when a seller argues with any of you, I mean, what goes through my mind I want to ask the seller is, how many homes have you sold in the Big Bear area in the last 5 years? Why are they arguing with you? Why are they arguing with you?
Because they want to be right. And you- and
their
they
house is
want
the best
you to
house.
agree with them.
I mean,
You know what other thing I've been looking at is that the appraisers are coming in high to these places that are in really crappy neighborhoods.
So are they actually looking at the house? Are they doing drive-bys? Are they just looking at the pictures?
No,
Oh.
so the sellers of the property, they said that it appraised at this much. Why are you giving me comps for this? Like my house is up here and you're giving me down here.
Yeah. And I can talk in theory without looking at the documents that you're talking about. I mean, without looking at the appraisal and without looking at the house, it's hard for me to comment as to where the people are off, but it's going to come back to, that there is something that affected the value that the appraiser didn't take into consideration. That's what I mean.
Sometimes Zillow throws everybody off too.
Yeah, I mean, there's, again, the numbers give you some areas to look at, but in order to accurately price the value of something, you have to make adjustments. There is all about adjustments. Aside from Gilligan style log homes that were built from 1992 through 1999 or 2005, I mean, there's really no tract houses outside of the area over there by the cemetery. I mean, the Gilligan log homes are about as close to a tract house as that you're going to get all over the place, because they were all the same cookie cutter kind of thing. Everything's an adjustment.
I like that, bottom line.
Yeah.
Everything is an adjustment. It's just figuring out what the number is, to adjust to.
Yeah. I wish, in answer to Bill is, I mean, I understand the argument about trying to justify what your value is. I found that over the years to be more effective, because I don't think that using the data purely is as effective as doing it from the respect that I do. And yes, I've been in houses that are zeros, Dana.
Okay.
I've been in a zero
It's not
buyer
worth-
appeal.
It's not worth anything.
But it's, it is, and I think I'll leave you guys with this, unless you guys have any other questions, is that the more effort that you put into learning about the value and to understanding it and being able to explain it, the more valuable you are as a professional. But there's a critical thing is that just because you know it doesn't mean you have to tell people. Does that make sense? It doesn't mean you have to tell people. The only reason that you have to explain to people the difference in value is when they're asking to be convinced. So if they say, well, they're asking $450, but I don't think it's worth that. Why is it worth that? Well, then you've got to explain how that value is justified. Okay. Or if a seller says, I want $550 and it's worth $450, then you're required to convince them of it. But if you show somebody a house and they say, I'd like to buy it, is it worth it? And just say, well, how much did you want to offer? Let's see if they'll take it. And if they will, and if they say, yeah, I'll pay that, then you don't need to tell them how smart you are, right? You don't have to tell them how smart you are. because we just went through a class that's really confusing, that is hard to put our hands around, to put our arms around. It's hard to do that. Can you imagine being the general public and having them sit through this class and having everything that I shared with you and have them say, yeah, I get it? No, they don't get it. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. Okay. So you don't want to go into those discussions because you'll just confuse people. You only give them enough to answer their objection or to educate them, to help them to move forward.
So you're suggesting that we go in loaded for bear then, but don't need to pull out the big gun?
Absolutely not. Yeah. As a salesperson, I've witnessed it in others, and I'm guilty of it myself, which is going on and 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 on. And that's what I'm doing now. So I'm going to shut up. And thank you guys for coming. I hope it was helpful. I know that this is difficult. I know that it's something that you have to revisit all the time. I know that you have to go on tour regularly to see what's out there. And you have to be talking with buyers and sellers all the time because their attitudes change. Their attitudes change. Okay, so in order to, refine your pricing skills, you need to be listening to what's happening currently in the market. Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Guys,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, if
Thanks, Mark.
anybody wants to go through the exercise of sending me a house and 3 comps and explaining what they think the value is and why, I will call you and we'll go over it, and I'll share the comments with you. Okay.
Thank you.
All righty.